Hi, everybody. This poem that I'm going to start our poetry unit with is called I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. It was written by William Wordsworth in 1807. He is a British poet, and I think I have to advance this to get to the actual title of this. There we go. How I'm going to do most of these slides for poetry is read the poem first and then go into the notes and lectures that I have on each one of the poems. Some of the poems, like I did with a couple of the short stories, I'll just provide slideshows rather than lectures, but most of them I'll do a lecture so that you can hear and see what I'm talking about and interpreting and analyzing with each poem. So let's move on. This is I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth to me the show had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So notice, and I'll do this with other poems, that I've put a star over to the side with some of the words that you may be unfamiliar with, or even poetic terms. So if there are other words that you're unfamiliar with, you can just look them up yourself. So here's a little relevant biography of William Wordsworth. He was the central poet in the English Romantic Revolution in poetry. So if you've ever heard of Romantic poetry, William Wordsworth was the founder and kind of the foundation of Romantic poetry. He started writing poetry around 1790 until his death in 1850. Remember, this poem was written in 1807. He was not only considered a nature poet, but he had a fresh take on the relationship between humans and the natural world. And in his poetry, and we can see that in this poem, nature connects with the human mind. And beyond that, nature is representative of the mind of God. So these are important themes and biographical moments in his poems. The situation and the speaker of this poem. Wordsworth himself is the I of the poem. He is the speaker. We have no reason to believe that he is constructing someone else to be the speaker or the narrator of the poem. It is a lyric poem, and he is the speaker. A not uncommon event begins the poem. A man feeling lonely goes for a walk. He describes the emotion of loneliness that stimulated this walk. And then he comes upon a field of golden daffodils and undergoes a spiritual transformation. Later, in the final stanza, when he feels either psychologically empty or psychologically too full, and I'll go over that in a minute, he ponders on the sight of the daffodils and it restores him spiritually. It allows him to move forward in his mind and in his life. So that's the situation and the speaker. Here are some themes and tone of the poem. So the tone begins, I think, as one of melancholy. He's lonely, lonely as a cloud that floats on high. And once he sees those daffodils, the tone becomes more restorative. So it restores him through the organic relationship between the human mind and nature. So we have four stanzas. The first three stanzas, we have a feeling of alienation in the universe. Um, he's which merges and moves into a feeling of connection. as a result of seeing the daffodils. And then the final stanza is the recollection of his seeing the daffodils. The memory engenders a second emotion, one that's like the first emotion of loneliness. But instead of feeling lonely, his inward eye is the bliss of solitude. And that notion of inward eye is something that is prominent in romantic poems and poets. And Wordsworth is a great example of that. The inward eye can be, and we can call it synonymous with his imagination and his psyche. So the inward eye, or his imagination, or his memories, his looking inside himself, is now blissful, it's pleasurable and ideal. Instead of feeling lonely, that imagination is now the bliss of solitude. So he's lonely at the beginning in a deeply melancholic or sad way. At the end, he's not exactly lonely. He's alone, he's in solitude, but it's not melancholic anymore, it's blissful. Memory recreates the scene of the daffodils in his imagination. Happiness is recaptured through that memory. And so what we can discern from all of this is our imagination, therefore, can take us beyond our empty or our too analytical mood. I'll talk about that in a minute. Beyond even our own mortality, and it connects us with something eternal. Nature, therefore, becomes something eternal. This happens to him often, and he can go back to that, connect with nature organically, and see the infinite. He can see God through his imagination, in essence. Diction and figurative language. I mentioned that I was going to talk about this portion, which you may wind up skipping over, but it's important to read every word in a poem, put it together with the other words, and see how it all gels. So an interesting piece of diction in the final stanza is when he says, in vacant or in pensive mood. He is lying on his couch, either without thinking, he's in a vacant mood, he's completely empty, or he's in a pensive mood. If you're pensive, you're deeply thinking. So he's either empty or he's deeply thinking. These moments are exact contraries. His inward eye, his imagination, in other words, helps him in both instances. When he has no thought, when he's empty, and perhaps that can parallel with depression. Perhaps that can just parallel with a moment of melancholy or sorrow, not necessarily clinical depression. It also helps him when he has too much thought, when he's overthinking, when he's overanalyzing, perhaps when he's worrying too much, perhaps when his mind is so full that he doesn't know what to do. We've all been in both of those situations before, and he is poetically discussing them and comparing them and contrasting them and saying that his imagination and memory of the daffodils, or that memory of nature, can help him in both instances. So nature connects with the human spirit. A simile comes up in the very first stanza. He's lonely as a cloud. He's comparing himself to a cloud, which are two unlike things that are being compared using the word as. How can a cloud be lonely? I suppose some clouds are momentarily alone as they drift, but they always come back together again. There are always more than one cloud in the sky. His mind is perhaps drifting as well, and that could be why he's comparing himself to a cloud. Later stanzas, we move forward to a crowd of daffodils, which is the counterpart of lonely, as well as a host, which is many, 10,000. Did he really see 10,000 daffodils? No, but he's exaggerating that large number to really play up the change between loneliness and connection. So we first have changes in numbers, then we have changes of relationships in the poem. There's an isolated image of one cloud, which is replaced by echoing images of fluttering daffodils, twinkling stars in the Milky Way, and sparkling dancing waves. And finally, we have changes in motion. Wandered and floats becomes dancing and danced. So something more passive and slow becomes more fast and active. The first through the third stanzas are also, interestingly, if you notice, in past tense, whereas the final stanza is in present tense. So the final stanza happens now and will continue to happen in the future. The first three stanzas are memory or imagination. More figurative language and sound qualities. Personification. The poem is filled with examples of personification. Daffodils dance, stars stretch, the waves dance. What might this suggest? It certainly, to me, suggests the importance of nature. The fact that nature is very much like humans in many ways. And that's one of the reasons that he connects to nature so well. It has very regular rhyme. And I'm going to explain a little bit about how to find the rhyme scheme of a poem. What you do is you place a lowercase letter at the end of each line that rhymes with another line in the poem. So the first line rhymes with the third line. Both would be labeled a lowercase a. The second line rhymes with the fourth line. Both would be labeled a lowercase b. And then there's a couplet at the end of each stanza, which are two lines that rhyme together. So of those 6 lines in stanza number 1, the 2 final lines rhyme, so they would be called CC. And then that next bullet point, I have what the whole poem would be labeled. A, B, A, B, C, C, D, E, D, E, F, F, and so on. I think the regular rhyme and fluidity of that rhyme matches the fluidity and smoothness of the poem. We have alliteration, daffodils and dancing in the first stanza, which of course plays up the personification, and the human mind also remembers alliteration easily. We're supposed to remember daffodils dancing, as that's the main subject of the poem. And then assonance. Assonance are vowel sounds that are alike. So short or long vowels. The short have to match with short or the long with long. So in stanza 1, we have the long O sound, or floats, host, golden, all of those long O sounds. They're positive words that stretch out as we say them, even as they are short words. So this plays up how positive he finally sees life after he sees the host of golden daffodils. And this is my final thoughts on poem analysis. Remember, with this and all poems, I'm providing some ideas to get you thinking creatively and analytically. You certainly can and will have your own interpretations based on language, theme, tone, speaker, and action. So after reading my analyses, add to them with your own. And that's what you've done with A Raisin in the Sun. That's what you've done with the short stories. That's what you'll do with the poems. Remember, you want to find the action of the poem. You want to find the speaker. Those things will not change. But what will change is your ideas about the speaker, your ideas about how language works, how the theme works, different stanzas and how they work together. So this is how we will analyze poems, and this is how I'll do so as the rest of the weeks roll on in our poetic interpretation. Okay, that's all for now. Bye-bye.